The snowstorm had swallowed the mountains whole. Wind howled like a beast, tearing through the pine trees that creaked and groaned under its icy grip. Ivan trudged up the narrow trail, his fur-lined coat heavy with frost, his rifle slung over his shoulder. It was another lonely evening for him, another night in the wilderness where silence was his only company. He had lived this way for nearly 10 years, since the accident that had taken his wife and son in a winter avalanche. The mountains had become both his prison and his shelter. He hunted, chopped wood, survived. That was all. But that night, something was different. As he stopped near a frozen stream, he heard a sound that didn't belong to the forest. It was faint at first, barely cutting through the wind. Then it came again, a voice trembling, small, and filled with terror. "Please, don't hurt me. I can't walk." Ivan froze in his tracks. His breath caught in his throat. The voice came again, weaker this time, carried by the storm. Without thinking, he tightened his gloves and began moving toward the sound. Snow reached his knees, but he pressed on, guided only by instinct and that fragile human cry. He climbed through thick pines, the beam of his lantern slicing, through the darkness, until it fell upon a shape, a small one, curled at the base of a fallen tree. His heart jolted. It was a girl no older than 7 or 8, her hair tangled and crusted with ice. Her thin coat was torn, her legs bleeding and bare, her lips trembling as she tried to speak. "Don't, please," she whispered again, shielding her face as if expecting a blow. Ivan immediately dropped his rifle into the snow and knelt beside her. Hey, it's all right," he said softly, his voice shaking. "I'm not here to hurt you." Her skin was like ice. He could see the bluish tint of frostbite on her feet. He stripped off his thick outer coat and wrapped it around her tiny frame, lifting her carefully into his arms. The child whimpered, then went limp against his chest. The storm was relentless, but Ivan didn't stop. Every step was agony, yet something deep inside him, something buried under years of pain, had come alive again. He didn't know who the girl was or where she came from. All he knew was that for the first time in a decade, someone needed him again. The storm raged through the night, but inside Ivan's cabin the fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the wooden walls. The small room smelled of pine smoke and melted snow. On the old bed near the fire lay the girl, wrapped tightly in a wool blanket. Her breathing was shallow, her skin still pale, but she was alive. Ivan moved quietly, heating water over the fire. He poured it into a bowl and gently cleaned the cuts on her legs, his rough hands surprisingly careful. Each time she stirred or whimpered, he froze, afraid of frightening her. He wasn't used to people anymore, especially not children. Hours passed. The wind outside howled like wolves, but in the cabin, only the steady crackle of burning logs filled the air. When Ivan finally sat down in his chair, exhaustion hit him. He looked at the girl, wondering how she had ended up alone in such a storm. No one came this deep into the mountains, not unless they were desperate. By morning, the storm had eased. A weak gray light spilled through the frosted window. Ivan poured water into a tin cup, then turned when he heard a faint voice. Where's my mama?" He met her eyes for the first time, big, frightened, and full of tears. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He saw his own daughter in those eyes, the one he had lost years ago. His throat tightened. "I don't know," he said softly, "but we'll find her. I promise." The girl's name, he learned, was Liza. She was from a village several miles away. Her mother's car had slid off the road during the storm. She remembered the crash, the snow, the darkness, and then nothing. Over the next few days, Ivan took care of her as best he could. He made her soup from dried meat and potatoes, wrapped her feet in clean cloth, and built a small fire every few hours to keep her warm. At first, she barely spoke, but as time passed, she began to watch him closely, her fear slowly melting away. One evening, while Ivan repaired his boots by the fire, Liza whispered, "Why do you live here all alone?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, "Because there's no one left to come home to." She stared at the fire for a long time before replying, "Maybe. Now there is." Her words sank deep into his heart, echoing louder than any storm ever could. When the morning sun finally broke through the clouds, it revealed a world of white, fresh snow blanketing every rock, every pine, every trace of the night before. Ivan stood at the edge of his cabin, pulling on his heavy boots and tightening the straps of an old wooden sled. Behind him, little Liza sat wrapped in layers of wool and fur, her cheeks rosy but her eyes full of worry. "Are we going to find Mama today?" she asked softly, her voice trembling like the winter air. Ivan turned, his weathered face calm but determined. "Yes," he said. "We'll find her." He fastened the sled rope around his shoulder and began pulling it down the trail. The air was sharp and every breath burned his lungs. The forest stretched endlessly before them, silent except for the crunch of snow beneath his boots. Yet he could feel Liza's eyes on him. Trusting, hopeful, fragile. Near the frozen stream, Ivan stopped. The storm had buried most of the tracks, but faint impressions remained, boot prints and tire marks, half covered by the snow. He crouched down, brushing away the icy crust with his glove. "Someone was here," he murmured. They followed the tracks uphill, past jagged stones and fallen trees. The wind picked up again, biting at their faces. Then, as they turned a corner near the ravine, Ivan saw something that made him stop. A broken car tilted sideways against a snowdrift, its doors hanging open, metal twisted from the crash. Liza gasped. "That's Mama's car!" she cried, struggling to stand in the sled. Ivan's stomach tightened. He approached slowly, checking inside. The car was empty, but signs of life remained. A torn scarf on the seat, footprints leading away through the trees. Hope surged inside him. "She got out," he said firmly. "She's alive." Liza's eyes filled with tears, half relief, half fear. "Then we have to find her." And they did. For hours, Ivan pulled the sled, following the faint trail that wound deeper into the forest. He could feel his muscles ache, but he didn't stop. For years, he had lived with no reason to fight. But now he had one. The cold bit into his skin, but something inside him burned brighter than the fire in his cabin ever had. The will to protect this child and reunite her with her mother, no matter what it took. The forest had grown quiet by evening. The sky was a deep blue, streaked with the last golden light of sunset. Ivan trudged forward, his legs aching, his breath coming out in white clouds. Behind him, little Liza clung to the sled's edge, her eyes scanning the endless stretch of snow-covered trees. The trail they had been following was growing fainter, but Ivan refused to give up. Then, just as he rounded a bend near a cluster of birches, something caught his eye, a splash of red against the white snow. He bent down and picked it up. It was a scarf, delicate and torn at the edge. He held it up for Liza to see. Her eyes widened. "That's Mama's. She always wears that." Ivan's pulse quickened. He looked ahead and saw faint footprints, continuing toward a small wooden hunting shed barely visible through the trees. His heart pounded as he quickened his pace. Each step felt heavier, but hope pushed him forward. As they neared the shed, he heard something. A weak, muffled sound from inside. A voice. He rushed to the door and pushed it open. Inside, crouched near a dying fire, was a woman. Her clothes were torn, her face pale and frostbitten, but her eyes, those tired, desperate eyes, lit up when she saw the little figure behind Ivan. "Liza!" she screamed, her voice breaking. The little girl leapt from the sled and ran into her mother's arms. They clung to each other, sobbing, the sound echoing softly in the wooden walls. Ivan stood in the doorway, silent, his chest tight. For years, he had forgotten what love looked like, forgotten what it meant to fight for someone. Liza's mother looked up, tears freezing on her cheeks. You saved her," she whispered. "How can I ever thank you?" Ivan shook his head. "You don't need to," he said quietly. "She saved me." The woman didn't understand, but Liza did. She turned and smiled through her tears. "He's my hero," she said proudly. Outside, the last rays of sun bathed the snow in gold. Ivan stepped out, looking toward the horizon. The wind was calm now, the storm long gone. He felt something inside him, something warm, something alive. For the first time in years, the mountain man smiled. He had found peace not in solitude, but in saving a life that reminded him what it meant to be human again.